Well, if you're at all worried about bias in this list, let me just start out by saying one of my own bikes is the absolute worst bike on this list, in my opinion. Hello friends, welcome back to the Dork Side. Today, let's talk about my personal tier list for dual sport motorcycles for beginners. Now, a few things to keep in mind before I jump into the rankings. One, this list is purely subjective. So, if you're gonna be like, objectively, the suspension is just don't, okay? These are my personal opinions based on my experiences with these bikes, most of which I have ridden, a few I haven't, so it'll be some educated guessing, but this is a subjective list based on a few criteria in my mind. Here are the considerations I'm using to create this list. First and foremost, ease of riding. What is the easiest bike for a new rider to get into and ride without being intimidated to build skills comfortably? Second is longevity. So how long can this bike last you? There are some bikes that are great for beginners, but you'll outgrow quickly and be bored with. There are other bikes that are maybe better longer term, but are gonna be harder to start on, so that factors into this list. Also considering versatility, reliability, price, cost of ownership, and difficulty of ownership. And when we're talking about new riders, I'm also assuming that they're not great mechanics, they're new mechanics, they're not people that want to be doing their own valve checks and stuff like that, so that's gonna factor into this as well. Also, to clarify what I mean by dual sport, because it is a little bit subjective from time to time, we're only looking at single-cylinder street-legal motorcycles, and I'm excluding scramblers like the Van 200 in this list. It's going to be the dirt bike inspired street legal motorcycles like this 300L Rally. Okay, cool, enough preamble, let's jump right in. We're going to start with the F tier. What is the absolute worst motorcycle or motorcycles, dual sport motorcycles for new riders out there? And my pick, there's one motorcycle in the F tier, and I think it's going to surprise you. It's the Honda CRF300L. I think this is a terrible motorcycle for new riders for a lot of reasons. It's expensive. There's a lot of maintenance. The seat height is very high, and it is twitchy and difficult to control at slow speeds. It's not easy for a new rider to ride. My objective evidence for this is the sheer number of them you can find with 900, 1,000 miles, 400, 500 miles on Marketplace going for an insanely cheap price, because people buy these bikes thinking that they're going to be a good introduction because it's only a 450. It's a terrible motorcycle for new riders. I do not recommend it. And even for more experienced riders, it still needs a little work to make it great. I think it's a great bike the way I have it set up, but I've got exhaust, ECU, full suspension, all those things done to it, and that's kind of what it takes to tame it down a little to where even an average rider like me can ride it. So F tier, absolute worst motorcycle out there for dual sport beginners, in my opinion, is the Honda CRF300L. So moving up to the D tier, which are bikes that are a little bit better than the 450L, but not amazing for new riders. And I'm lumping a bunch of common models together here, so just bear with me. KTM 500 EXC-F, the KTM 350 EXC-F, the Husqvarna 501 and 350, what do they even call it? I don't even know. So those bikes are all in the same category in my opinion. The 501 and the 500 are essentially the same bike, minor changes. And also in the D tier, all of the betas, so the 390 RRS, the 430 RRS, and the 500 RRS. They're great in the hands of a skilled rider, but they are harder to ride, they require more skill, they are intimidating, they have tall seat heights, and they require a lot of maintenance, a lot of valve checks, things like that. The trade-off for high performance is more maintenance. These bikes all have that in spades, and so therefore, in my opinion, they're not great for new riders, and I put them in the D tier. They're also really expensive. I'm assuming most new riders aren't looking to drop $13,000 on their first dual sport bike. Moving up to the C tier, these are bikes that are okay under the right circumstances, but I still think are probably too difficult for a new rider to enjoy, to learn on. First bike on this list is the Yamaha WR250R, another bike that I love. My buddy Duck Fan has one. I've ridden with him a ton of times. I've ridden it. I have a full test ride video on it, and I'll just say a couple things about this. One, the seat height is very high. Seat height isn't everything, and it is more manageable than most people think, but it's super intimidating to jump on that bike. It's very tall, and also the way it makes its power. So it's very revvy. It's a very revvy engine. All the power's in the top of the power band, and you've got to learn how to get up there and stay there with clutch modulation. And it's not the reliable, comfortable, easily chuggable, luggable beast that some of the bikes that are higher up on this list are. So it's just a little bit harder to ride, a little bit finicky. Not a big fan of the WR for brand new riders. Also, the Husky 701, KTM 690, GasGas 700. Street legal, great all-around bikes. They're not very heavy. They have a lot of power for the highway, but that's what I don't like about them for a new rider. And I think that's the kind of bike you grow into. I don't think it's the kind of bike you should start on personally. They also have a little bit more involved maintenance and things like that, so I don't recommend the 701, 690, 700 for new riders. That's something I would put in that C tier. Also in the the C tier, the Honda XR650L. That is a venerable classic of a machine and has been unchanged for decades, but it is very tall, kind of top heavy, and not something I would recommend for a brand new rider to get started on. It's another great bike that's great to grow into. If you want to do everything on it and have a super capable bike, it is that. Just like the 690-701, but without the reliability and maintenance issues as much. So nothing wrong with a 650L, I just don't think it's great for new riders. Okay, on to the fun stuff. The B tier. These are bikes that I think are easy to ride, or mostly easy to ride, but won't last you as long, or bikes that are a little bit harder to get started on, but could last you a long time. And this is the biggest tier, has the most motorcycles in it. The KLR650 and the KLR650S. I thought about moving the S up one tier because the low seat height makes it a little bit easier to ride, but it's still super heavy, top heavy. It weighs as much as an adventure bike. It's probably easily the heaviest bike on this list. That makes me think, while I think you can learn on it, it really helps to be a little bit taller to manage the weight on that bike. While the KLR I think is very easy to ride and get into, it's definitely not the easiest bike for a brand new beginner dual sport rider. It's not the easiest bike to learn on off-road, better than some, but not the best. Also in this tier, the Yamaha TW200. Now, if you're just looking for the easiest bike to ride, and you like that classic look, and you want to have traction for days, the TW200 is hard to beat. The reason why it's not like higher on the list is because it's not going to last you very long. It's underwhelming power-wise. It's a great mule to carry you through the backcountry, but the first time you try to get out on the highway on it, you're going to wish you were on something else, I feel like. There are bikes that are just as capable or almost as capable off-road that are much better on the road, but that T-Dubs is a solid choice. You can find them inexpensively. They're not hard to work on. Great traction, low to the ground. There's a reason why they use them in all the MSF classes, because they're easy to ride for beginners. That's a bike that I highly recommend. I just don't think it's the very best bike for beginners. In a similar vein, the KLX230. I'm a big fan of that bike. I had a good time riding it. I think it's very fun, but it is just a little underpowered when you get up into the higher revs. So if you're just wanting to learn off-road, if you're just wanting to putt around locally or commute, you're not going to spend a bunch of time on the highway. It's a great bike for that, but I think eventually you are going to get annoyed with the lack of ability to go highway speeds for long periods of time or to carry a lot of gear. There are just more powerful bikes out there for a similar price point, but it's a solid bike to get started on, a great learner bike, and I do highly recommend it. I have a test ride video on that one, which I really enjoyed. Check that out. Also in the B tier, and for similar reasons, the Suzuki DR200. They don't make them anymore, but you can find used ones, and that's another bike that's easy to ride and learn on, but is a little underpowered. It also doesn't have the modern technology that the 230S has. It's carbureted, old school, but if you can get your hands on one, it's a great bike to learn on. Just not going to last you forever. And also in this B tier, a bike that I have a lot of experience with, the Suzuki DRZ400S. Now, it's in here because I think it's a solid bike that you can do a lot on. It's not like fun on the freeway all day, but it'll do it. It can carry gear, it can run a BDR. It's just a little intimidating seat height wise, so it's a lot harder for a new rider, I think, to get on that very tall, what is it, 37-inch seat height, I want to say. So it's not an A tier bike in my opinion, but if you're okay with the seat height, it's a bike that can last you a long time, and I loved it. It's the only bike I've sold that I missed, so that should tell you something about how I feel about the DRZ. So that's the B tier. Let's talk about the A tier. These are very good, very solid bikes that I think are good for beginners that you should strongly consider. And the first one is the venerable, the classic, the almost said dinosaur, kind of, but not really. It's more like a wily veteran of the adventure and dual sport world, and that is the Suzuki DR650S. This bike weighs about the same as the DRZ, has a lower seat height, and it is capable of going basically anywhere you want to. It's got enough power to cruise on the highway. It's the ultimate kind of do anything bike, and I've said for a long time if I had to go down to one bike, it would be a strong contender, top of my list, because I could do everything I like to do, up to including trail riding, all the way to BDRs and long highway tours on that DR650S. Now, it doesn't do anything perfectly, but it's easy enough to manage, easy enough to ride, solid, dependable, if classic, outdated design, and I really like that DR650, so it's in the A tier, in my opinion. Also in the A tier, a couple of retired veterans that you might be able to pick up for a song these days. The first of which is the Honda CRF300L. That was my first dual sport, and I'm including the Rally in this too, so everything I'm saying about the 250L, I'm also kind of saying about the Rally. But this is an easy to ride bike. It's easy to learn on. The seat height looks intimidating on paper, but the second you sit on the thing, that squishy suspension just squishes down. It is a great bike to commute on, to ride around. You can do highway speed 60-ish, 55, 60 comfortably. After that, it gets a little harder. It's easy to learn on, easy to ride on, a great bike for putting through the woods and dipping your toe into the worlds of like trail riding and even moto camping if you want to throw some gear on it. And similarly, the old Kawasaki KLX250S. So both of these bikes have been upgraded to 300s, one of which I'm standing in front of. This is the CRF300L Rally. But basically everything I just said about one applies to the other. The KLX has a little bit better suspension, but you got to watch the model year because the older ones are all carbureted. Again, it's not a deal breaker, just something to be aware of. And I think it was only the last few years of the 250S that had fuel injection. So keep an eye out for that. But those two bikes are bikes I would put in the A tier, and they're bikes that you can get cheaply and easily. They're easy to ride. They'll do just about anything you want to do. Easy to maintain, and you can buy them for a song these days because they've been replaced, or at least cheaper than their replacement models. Another A tier bike is one of my favorite beginner motorcycles ever. It's the Yamaha XT250. It somehow manages to have very similar specs to the 250L, but with a much lower seat height. So it is very easy and unintimidating to ride. It's a very confidence-inspiring bike. It's based on the old XT225 Zero. It's an upgraded version of that, and that thing is widely renowned as one of the easiest to ride, best kind of trail bikes ever. It'll take you on the highway. It'll do everything I just said about the 250L. It's just not going to be the best bike forever. It's the kind of bike that I could see you eventually being like, man, I wish I could go 65 miles an hour. But easy to ride, easy to learn on, inexpensive, Japanese reliability. It's hard to beat the XT250. So what does beat the XT250? Because we got one tier left, the S tier. That is the best, the super, the fantastic, the top of the line, the absolute best choices if you can make it work for yourself, in my opinion. And there's only two and a half bikes in this tier. And I'm gonna go ahead and guess, you can guess one of them because I'm standing behind it and I haven't mentioned it yet, but I think the Honda CRF300L and the Honda CRF300L Rally belong in the S tier in terms of best bikes for new riders, because they're easy to ride, they're inexpensive to maintain, they're easy to maintain, and they have the power and capability to last you a long time. When the 300s were first announced, I was skeptical. I was like, what's the difference? How much difference could 50cc's really make? And having owned both the 250L and this 300L Rally, I can tell you a lot of difference. I can cruise at 70 comfortably on this bike. Sixth gear is actually useful on this bike. It was kind of an afterthought on the 250L, and I'm no heavier now than I was then. So this is truly a bike you could buy that will last you forever, and that's why it's the top of this list for me. Everything I said about the A-tier bikes, easy to ride, easy to learn on, capable of commuting, cheap, all of that stuff applies to this bike, but it just does everything that those bikes do better, including a higher price. I think the 300L is an absolute top tier choice for a brand new rider, and they're finally starting to show up in dealerships again. I've seen a few of them, so you might be able to get your hands on one. Highly recommend it. And right up there with it is the other bike I haven't mentioned, the other elephant not in the room, as it were, the Kawasaki KLX300. I do think these two bikes are very similar. I've ridden both of them. I have a detailed comparison if you want to see my thoughts on the KLX300 versus the 300L, which I can link for you. But that KLX300 is another bike that is a solid, easy to ride, easy to learn on. It's got a little bit more suspension adjustability than the Honda does, but also a bike that can last you a long time because it just has just enough power to be viable in just about any situation, at least for sure until you decide you want to move up to an adventure bike or try something else. I don't think you can beat the 300L Rally and the KLX300 in terms of overall value, ease of riding, and potential longevity for a new rider. So that is my tier list in terms of beginner dual sport motorcycles. I'm sure that you disagree, and I would love if you would explain why in the comments in a respectful and helpful way. Let's have that conversation. I think the more voices we can get in this, the more perspectives people can have, the better choices they're going to make when it comes to their own motorcycle choices and safety and all of that. So please chime in the comments. Let's talk about it. What would you move and where? What bike have I forgotten? I'm really interested in your opinions. Let's chat. The mission of this channel is to inspire, educate, and empower you to go out and have adventures of your own. And I'd be honored if you'd consider subscribing, because I'm the dork in the road and I want to be your internet riding buddy, and I'm better than your regular riding buddies because I come with a mute button. Thank you for watching, and please do not forget to be excellent to each other. Thank you.
Excellent!
Did I even hit the button? No.